Mike, thanks for being with us, buddy.
Hey, how are you guys? I have you on my TV, Paul. I'm not used to seeing you without a tie on. It's going to take me a while to get used to this.
I could get used to this during the show. What do you think?
I think we should lobby for that. I think that should be the New Year's resolution. Casual Monday through every day we do the show.
And it's Mike's show, Ross, as you know. So maybe we'll take that back to the office.
If Mike lobbied for that, it would happen. And by the way, we are about 30 seconds away from Mike making fun of me in some way. I don't know how yet, but Mike throwing a slight in my direction, about 30 seconds away.
Mike?
When you least expect it, expect it.
It'll happen at some point here in the next 10 to 15 minutes. Mike, lots of good action on the field to get to in between Week 16 and Week 17, but let's begin with the Peyton Manning situation. You've had about 48 hours to think about and digest what you have heard. Your number one reaction and where you think this is going next.
Well, I mean, from a PR standpoint, I think this has been handled miserably by Peyton Manning's people, and Ari Fleischer involved in this process. He's the big winner in all this because now we're all reminded that Ari Fleischer is available to provide crisis counseling for PR issues that arise for sports figures. Why not just say nothing? No comment. Work reporters behind the scenes to leave this alone. This is an Al Jazeera report from a guy who later recanted the story, although I think that the fact that he recanted what he said when he was being secretly recorded may not be as troublesome as some would suggest. It doesn't completely wipe the site clean. All it means is this is something the guy won't say publicly, but he did say it privately. But they should have been saying nothing publicly or privately by issuing statement after statement. And Peyton did 3 interviews, and Fleischer has statements. His agent has statements. The team he plays for now, the team he used to play for, the Geyer Institute, that's what's giving this thing legs. If they had just said nothing and aggressively worked people behind the scenes to leave this thing alone, that it wouldn't have been nearly as big as it was. And so instead it takes over the entire Sunday. And now going forward, Peyton Manning has to ask himself, is he going to take legal action over this? Because if he does, guys, it's going to continue to be a story for a lot longer than just one weekend.
See, but Mike, if he took that strategy, then a lot of people, maybe myself included, would say, well, maybe where there's smoke, there's fire. And if someone accused me of this and I didn't do it, I would shout from the rooftops, I didn't do it, which appears to be what Peyton's doing.
Yeah, but you know what? You shout once, because if you shout more times than that, then you have people say he's protesting too much. And the one wrinkle in all of this that doesn't add up is the stubborn refusal for anyone who has spoken out, who's in position to know what Ashley Manning did or didn't do at that clinic, to say she didn't get HGH sent to her. And it's almost like they've deliberately stayed away from that specific topic. And this is what's causing people to think possibly there's concern that there's a paper trail that's going to come out. If they would draw a line in the sand that Ashley Manning got no HGH delivered to her from the Geyer Institute, that's the thing that could blow it all up if someone could prove that she did. And of all the statements that have been issued, she said nothing. Not that she has an obligation to, but the point is, when you have everyone else lining up to shoot this down, and the person who was directly implicated as getting the HGH that was been given to Peyton Manning saying nothing, and people tiptoeing around medical privacy issues without denying that she got HGH from the Geyer Institute, man, that creates a donut hole that invites some speculation and some analysis. And if they had just gone the say nothing route or just issue one statement and leave it at that, then maybe that trap never would have been put out there. That a lot of people point to that and say, yeah, this is reason to believe that maybe there is some smoke.
Paul Burmeister and Ross Tucker sitting in for Dan Patrick this morning on the Dan Patrick Show. We're talking to Mike Florio of ProFootballTalk.com and also of Football Night in America. What involvement, Mike, do you expect the league office to have, if any, as we move forward with this story?
The league officially has no comment, but anytime they become aware of something like this, they'll at least kick the tires and look into it. They've got to do something. They can't just completely ignore it. But here's the reality. 2011, from March 11 until the end of July, the players were locked out. There was no NFL per se. There were no NFL employees. The union had disintegrated. There was no drug testing, and there wasn't drug testing for HGH back in that time frame anyway. So I don't know what could be done, even if Peyton Manning came out and said, I took full advantage of the fact that the league was shut down during the lockout. I could do whatever I wanted to do to get healthy. If he come out and admitted, I don't know that they could do anything. Now, after he signed again with the Colts July 31, because he also was a free agent during the lockout. Once he signed with the Colts July 31 and the league was back up and running, he was subject to the prohibition on HGH use, and we don't know specifically when this guy contends that the HGH was used in 2011, but it makes it harder for the NFL to do anything about it if there would be any evidence. And the other problem is the NFL really has no way to get to any evidence. The key evidence is in the possession of the Geyer Institute, and the NFL has no subpoena power. The only way that the NFL would get any evidence would be if there would be some sort of investigation launched of the Geyer Institute by local, state, federal prosecutors under the notion that this institute is dispensing HGH in a way that violates the law, like that guy from Canada that got in all that trouble for bringing it in, Anthony something, can't remember his last name, but some folks were implicated for dealing with him. That's the way a lot of this stuff would come to light, if ever, if there was any type of a criminal investigation.
But ultimately, Mike, let's just say that they were sending HGH like this Charles David Sly originally said on the video, that they were sending HGH to the Manning household under Ashley Manning's name. There's really no way that you'd ever be able to prove it, right? Because if it went in her name and Peyton ingested it in the privacy of his own home, there's no way to ever know that he did it.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And, a lot of people reacted to this by saying, surely he wouldn't be so stupid to have his wife get the HGH. Well, you know what? Who else is going to get it? If you want it and you know you're not going to have it in your name, who else in your life are you going to trust more than your spouse to receive it and to give it to you? And it's all behind closed doors and nobody knows what's happening and there's no way to prove it unless your spouse turns on you. So you're right. It still would be ultimately difficult to prove. But, and I think that's why they've resisted saying there's no way that Ashley Manning ever got HGH. Because if they say that, and then it turns out she got it, I think it's easier to connect the dots with circumstantial evidence. Why would you deny she's gotten it if she did get it? And if you denied she's gotten it and she did get it, then, people are going to infer that she got it for one reason, to give it to Peyton.
Mike, the one thing that jumps out to me, and I know this Charlie Sly has come out and recanted what he said on that hidden video, but don't you think if he was lying like he says and just trying to test this reporter who's a British athlete or whatever, I'm confused. But anyway, don't you think this is pretty elaborate? Like he puts in details like we sent the HGH to Florida, or, we sent it to a couple baseball players. He had specific names, Peppers, Mike Neal. I mean, not exactly a household name. We sent Clay Matthews painkillers, but not HGH. I mean, if he's just making all this stuff up in his head, he's got an unbelievably detailed imagination.
Yeah, think about this. We've been in a green room many occasions, and the conversations that occur in a green room and the stories that get told, they would never be told if we had live microphones on at the time. And I think that's what happened to this guy. He was telling a story under a circumstance where he thought it was never going to be repeated. He believed it wasn't being recorded, and he would have never said those things publicly. And I don't know where this guy is in his career, but he's got to worry about legal liability. He's got to worry about whatever career he's trying to pursue being thrown off the rails permanently. And he's got something where he assumed it was not ever going to be repeated or publicized, being repeated and publicized. But guys, I could list 100 different stories that I've heard of over the years, sitting in green rooms hearing stories from former players like Ross and others who work at NBC who have been through the green room and at the studio in Stanford, and no one would ever say those on camera or with a microphone. And I don't know how anybody would react if it turned out that something that they were telling in the green room ended up being public. But I think that's the best example I can think of to compare it to what happened with Charlie Sly.
Paul Burmeister and Ross Tucker talking to Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk and also Football Night in America. Let's veer down a different path, a football path here, Mike, and talk about what we saw yesterday. Some major upsets, I think, really defining the landscape of what took place yesterday. Panthers, Patriots, Steelers, Seahawks lose. Even though it was an upset, I'm going to throw in the Packers amongst the disappointment here. Of those 5 teams, Mike, and thinking about the way they lost yesterday, which one do you think was the most bothersome?
Well, hey, you know what? Before I answer that question, I need to be clear. It's not like people in the green room talking about using HGH.
Right.
There's just like crazy stories of
Sure.
things that happen and opinions about different people. There's
Right.
been no admissions of HGH in the green room,
Right.
at least while I was in there.
Right.
So I just want to be clear on that. As to yesterday, I think the Packers getting beaten as badly as they did, it really makes me wonder whether or not they're going to be able to compete in the postseason. Maybe they can win in the wild card round, especially if they beat the Vikings on Sunday night and get that wild card game at home. But Paul, last week on the show, we said, the Packers are just good enough to lose in the divisional round. And I think we need to amend that to say the Packers are just good enough to get blown out in the divisional round.
I'm curious, Mike. I know some people think that NBC picks the game, week 17 that gets flexed in Sunday night, but it's really the NFL's decision. Do you think they got it right with Minnesota, Green Bay, and what were some of the other options in your mind?
Well, I don't know what the other options were specifically. I thought that if Carolina had won yesterday, the Panthers going for 16-0 would have made a lot of sense, although I don't know what kind of a draw that would have been from a rating standpoint, which is part of the analysis. I think Jets-Bills would have been a very compelling game if the Steelers beat the Browns earlier in the day, but that's the risk you're taking. That's the ultimate roll of the dice. If Jets-Bills had been flexed to primetime with Rex Ryan having an opportunity to knock the Jets out of the postseason, you have to assume the Steelers would win at Cleveland. If the Steelers lose at Cleveland, that game becomes completely meaningless. The only game that has meaning, regardless of what happens in any other game, is the Packers-Vikings game because it's for the NFC North crown and it's got different permutations about who has to play where and who goes to Washington and who goes to Minnesota and who goes to Green Bay. And so it's the one that definitely retains relevance regardless of anything else that happens. And that's what they're looking for. A game that retains postseason relevance no matter what happens with the other 15 games played. And I think this year that's the only game that really fit that criteria.
Mike, you should have heard the way Ross was talking about you in the green room this morning.
Oh, it's all on tape. I'll look forward to Ross's YouTube video recanting it.
Hey, Mike, we appreciate the time. I know you have PFT Live coming up here at the top of the hour, so have a good show, a radio show, and then we'll talk to you on PFT tomorrow evening.
All right, thanks. Good talking to you guys.
It's Mike Florio, ProFootballTalk.com, also Football Night in America.